Welcome to this mini episode of the Authentic Man podcast. And I'm David Chambers, and I'm joined by my partner, Asa Baav.
Hello.
And we're going to be talking and videoing. Depending where you are receiving this, you could be receiving this through Instagram as a video, you could be receiving this as one of my short podcast episodes, The Authentic Man, the mini episodes, where I kind of talk about, topics quickly, so in a bite-sized way. And it was a wonderful idea from also to talk about something around International Men's Day, which is on the 19th of November this year. And the kind of topic of this year is relations between men and women. And since this is, our world and what we do in terms of dating and relationships, I thought we'd be, also made a good point of doing a video around how women can support men. Because I think I talk a lot about how men can support women. But when I read out some statistics I'm going to hit you with now, you're going to realize that, as much as men have privilege, it doesn't mean that life is easy or that their lives are necessarily better all the time. So here's a few points around health and research that you might be of note. I'm going to read these out. Men have a suicide rate 3 times higher than women. 1 in 3 men have been victims of domestic violence. Men on average die 4 to 5 years younger than women. And these last two really kind of surprise me. Men are nearly twice as likely to suffer from lung cancer than women. And men are nearly twice as likely to suffer from heart disease than women. So when we kind of put these health statistics into perspective, you start realizing that men actually, they're dying a lot, of things that can really be prevented, to be honest. So we're going to talk about some of the, what would you say, emotional, relational ways in which we can support men today.
Yeah, I think, as a coach, so I'm a women's coach, couple coach, and I'm also a matchmaker. So I speak to a lot of single women and women in relationships, as well as men, of course. And over and over again, it comes up these 2 topics of how can we support each other emotionally and sexually. I think it's a lot of things that goes unsaid of what our expectation is on the opposite sex and maybe even ourselves. So yeah, it's a great opportunity to just uncover some of that and just how can women support men as well as we want to be supported. How can we give back what it is that we also want?
Yes, and it's important actually to, as somewhere in the Bible, I think it says, "Give and thee shall receive."
Yeah.
Or maybe I butchered that one, but you know the gist. And actually, I think we often go into relationships and relating with each other full stop in, I will receive and then I will give.
Yeah, something that we see a lot, pretty much everyone, I would say, comes into a dating journey, if we choose to speak about single people, and they do want to eradicate the dating dance. This is something we speak about a lot as coaches and as matchmakers, but what we don't find as often is the willingness to be vulnerable, to open up about how they actually feel, to open up about what they actually want and how they can be given this, because everyone is different, right?
Yeah.
So how can we lean into the vulnerability side and actually be all that we are, rather than, as you said, wait for the other person to start. It's a very passive way, and if you're really unlucky, it never happened because you're just sitting around waiting.
Yeah. So I guess one of the first points is actually is ways in which we can encourage men to feel safe to open up and talk about what they're feeling and what they're dealing with as well, whether that is, unhappiness, depression, stress, fears, whatever it may be, is actually encourage. And I want to look at the history of the word encourage, because I have a feeling that it means to give courage to. So, encouragement isn't, oh, why don't you talk about your feelings more? I wish you'd talk about your feelings. That's not encouragement. Right? Encouragement is, I would really love to hear how you're feeling, irrespective of whether it's what I would like to hear or not like to hear, but I just really want to know where you're at, how you feel, like, how was your day? And then just like allowing for the answer to come. Oh, it was good. Okay, cool. Well, what was good about it? How did that thing go that you said that was important to you? And actually be curious and kind of, like I said, encourage someone and not kind of think that you can berate someone into opening up, because I believe that a lot of these, for instance, a suicide rate, for instance, if men could feel that they were safe to open up, safe to talk, then they would be more connected to other men, but also to women. And I think that would have a huge effect on our mental health if we were just psychologically safe to speak in our relationships and in our relating, be that with our mothers, our sisters, our daughters even.
Yeah, and one of the things that you touched upon is about how we are feeling, and something that I find myself doing a lot in my one-to-one coaching at the moment is to gently give some insight into men's lives and kind of the men, masculine psyche, if you like, to just say, hey, just remember they have fears and they have worries and they have conditionings and they have shit going on too. And this is something that I relate to because I hear what men say on the other spectrum, and I also know it's true for me, in our relationship, where I felt myself being very, of course, attuned to my own awarenesses and my own fears and my own feelings and what I wanted and what I didn't want, that when I had been going through the cycle of being able to express and embrace all my feelings, that was the first time I had space to feel you deeper and hear you deeper and hear your fears and hear your thoughts. And it hit me, maybe it sounds stupid, but it hit me that I was like, oh shit, yeah, you got worries too. You have fears too. You have stories in your mind based on, childhood or other women that you've met or things that you see in society. So it's really how we can support men as women is to create the space to understand your partner's fears, understand what's going on for them. And when they open up, another big learning in there is when they do open up is to really practice non-reactive listening. And this comes from being deeply present with your own story and your own thoughts as your man open up about his.
Because what's also there is that he may start to talk about what he's feeling, and it won't be what you like hearing. It may even feel like he's having a go at you. It might feel like anger. It might feel like resentment, but you've asked him to open up. So at that point, if you then attack said person, right, said man, at that point, you're actually creating the situation for him not to open up, or even any small feelings of being judged for speaking. It's like anything, and it's not, I'm not saying it's easy, but it's actually worthwhile, because if we feel safe to speak, a lot of the issues that we have start to diminish. Like, we can't talk about how in the media and social media men often feel berated by women for being men, full stop. But it's like, how can you create the space for the men around you? It's funny, I wrote something recently down. I was like, 98% of men are good men, are good, decent people. 2% of men probably aren't. But we spend a lot of time paying a lot of attention to the 2%, and we don't spend much time praising and even looking at the 98%.
Yeah, and it's another conversation that's so important to have around, what is your story around men? And is it rooted in the past? Is it rooted in other people's experiences? Is it rooted in what you're seeing on your Instagram feed or whatever source of, social media that you connect with? And it's not to blame or anything. It's to just become very aware of what is the language that I'm using about men internally. And what conversations am I engaging with others, and what message am I receiving all the time? Because, looking on paper, I shouldn't be in a, conscious, deeply loving and trusting relationship if I were to look at the experiences that I had with men in my 20s. There was a lot to say for me back then that I would never trust men again. I would never trust myself again. I could not trust myself with men emotionally and sexually. So this is where we need to be aware of our own stories, and that just the message that comes in every day. And it might just be, little posts or little comments that you hear, or just like little thoughts. But over time, this becomes a huge, influence
Becomes your
over
reality.
you, and it becomes your reality. And this is the things when we're dating, for example, and when we're in relationship, it takes a split second potentially for you to count someone as potential mate or not potential, or you potentially lying to me, or you telling the truth based on all those messages and stories that we have created.
Yeah. And it's just, looking out for these generalizations about men. If you're a man listening to this, and there's often, we feel we have generalized ourselves, like men are bad, men are useless, men are weak, those sorts of things. Those are not conducive to supporting men. They're not conducive to you either, to be honest. And another thing we kind of thought about was like seeking out healthy male role models.
Yeah.
This is something that I actively did in my life probably 10 years ago. Like even through books, I just started to pick up books by men and be like reading about what other men were saying, because I didn't see any in my own life. So it's really important that you just go, okay, I need to find some healthy men, because, I think most of what we see on social media and media isn't necessarily saying anything good about men. And I'm not saying whether that should be right or wrong, but is it good for you? Ultimately, is it good for you? Is it good for you to believe this narrative of like, if we're looking at dating, like no men want to commit, no men want to settle down, no men want you. Those are not useful narratives to you, right?
No.
And they're not true, because they're not true for everybody, right? So it might have been true for you once or twice. That doesn't mean it's true for you all the time. So it's like, how can you create a new narrative that would be supporting to your kind of internal idea of men, but also then support outwardly to the men that you meet and whether that be, family, friends, and so forth.
Yeah. I like the word that you used, the support, because something I was going to say is around like, does this support the journey that you're on and what you want to create? I often find that because dating, of course, is very real, we're bringing ourselves to the table. It's not like in business where even though you are there, you can very much put on like a persona. You can see very much evidence for performance, if you're good, if you're, ahead, behind, whatever. But if you're looking at business, you would never sit and look and speak and hang around with everyone who just constantly talk about why the business failed and their shit. Customers, we get to learn from it, absolutely. But I find this very I don't know what words to use, but it's frustrating to also see in dating and relationships there is so much encouragement for things not going well. I think it's an appetite for it, so we can feel like we're not alone. But if it is your main source of how you interact with the messaging around it, then that becomes detrimental to what you're wanting to create. The business side or any other side, even sport, you will never hang around with the people who just miserably failed and didn't do the thing. And, you hang around with people who's like completed that marathon or the triathlon or whatever it's called in English. Triathlon. And all these things. So it's surrounding yourself with people. I think I mentioned it when we did the conscious relationship episode. One of my friends, and when we had a conversation, and she was like, she'd met someone new and she's very happy. And she said to me, well, I find myself often, if not always, to be with conscious men who are emotionally supportive. And I was like, I wonder what you do different in your life to other women potentially who never find themselves in there. Is it just pure luck that over and over again you find yourself with these men, or is it just bad luck for women who never finds themselves in that? But the conversation that you're listening to is so important.
And I guess there's one point that's kind of jumped into my mind based on some of these statistics, a lot around health, actually, around like health, like something as simple as, actually asking about each other's health. The men that whether that your father, be that your brother, is like, how are you feeling? Like, are you eating well? Like, and not as a criticism, as like a real curiosity, because I was just really struck with is, often we have these ailments as men and we just think that we have to tough it out and get through it. And it's actually inside of that is to, ask and inquire about what's going on for men, but also is to really beware about how you talk about men in the company of men. That if you see a man, for instance, crying or going to the doctor or feeling pain, that you're not criticizing for doing that, but in fact you're praising him for the strength it takes to do all those things. I think it's something that really just jumped into my mind there.
Yeah, and that's a similar line with vulnerability. A lot of women want men to be vulnerable, but a lot of women also have a unconscious bias around that vulnerability is weak. Because if they have a story that for themselves being vulnerable is weak, or being anything that's opposite to strong, maybe showing emotion, whatever comes up for women, you know, as you're hearing this, if this is your story around vulnerability, even if you want a man to be the thing that you don't have a healthy relationship with, then you are automatically gonna count him towards something not strong, not attractive, not whatever you see, like whatever weak. Often people are not attractive by weak, but if this is how you categorize certain attributes or traits that you actually want, it's gonna be a huge conflict in your mind.
Yeah. What was it? It was another point you would say?
And on that topic.
No, different topic.
Okay. And finally, wanted to talk about how women can support men in the bedroom. This is something that comes up a lot, as well as educators in this space. And I share the story that I share very often, but it just really pinpoints what I'm about to share. So when I went to a workshop years ago, and it was one of the speakers, he was saying to all the women in the audience, it was like hundreds of people there, think back of how often, or if you do worry about your body during sex, maybe you worry about your stomach if you're sitting up, if you're lying down, you know, whatever position you're in. And every woman pretty much nodded along. And then he said, just so you know, this is how often men worry about getting hard and staying hard and being good in bed.
Definitely.
And it was that realization. I was like, oh my God, again, I never really take the time. This is maybe, 3-4 years ago. I've never taken the time to understand the men's experience in the bedroom, because I was so absorbed with my own.
Yeah.
So it is really that, when just knowing that pretty much all men, if we just get like them all over, in one place, but that they do have sexual performance anxiety and that they worry about getting hard and staying hard, then we need to look at how can we support them. We need to look at our own sex education about what sex gets to look like. There is so much more than penetrative sex. And if it's not penetrative sex, what does it get to look like? And even if he is soft, that is not a bad thing. You can still have the man can still have a lot of pleasure. You can still do a lot of things. But it is that assumption. What's the assumption about a man if he is not hard, and if he is not hard for a long time? Yeah,
and this, these things are really supporting a man in his confidence, in his growth, is accepting him in these times when he's possibly not exactly the way you want him to be. And I think that's a big thing, because I see more and more through my work, and a lot of what I'm trying to instill in the men I work with is that you are enough. Our fear is that we are not enough. Our concern, our worry, everything we do is to prove and show the world that we are enough, or to show ourselves we are enough. And every time we get a small message from outside of us that kind of says that we're not enough, we have fear, we have worry, concern. And one of the things that I see a lot is our fear and our worry and concern are actioned in the world, not necessarily in the way you'd expect it to be. Sometimes when a man's afraid, he may appear to be angry, or he may appear to be, he may lash out in the same way, women do exactly the same thing. But I think sometimes we forget behind that action is actually fear, and we treat it as if that action is deliberately malicious and callous, but actually behind that is fear. My belief more than anything is so much of what we call kind of toxic masculinity, behind it is fear. Behind all the actions of toxic masculinity is a fear. Right, and it's hard sometimes to see it, but behind it is some fear that's acting out in a way that is not helpful to the person and other persons involved.
Yeah, No, God, and there is so much to say on that, and that's exactly, you know, I find a lot of women who wants to find a deeply committed, loving, emotional connection that is also get to be sexual and fun, but they have until now always been leading with a sexual self. It's like it's a manipulation of having what it is that they want, not consciously but subconsciously, because the fear is not to be vulnerable.
Got it.
You know, so that is something that comes up as well. So yeah, it's just so important to support men in the bedroom. It's not about staying hard. It's not about, you know, hard fucking. It's not about, you know, penetration for hours. There is so much more that you can do. And if you know that you're that the man is having anxiety around his performance in the bedroom, you know, it's important to talk about it and see what can you do to help. And if you feel like he's close to coming, or he comes quickly, which is like, I don't know what the stat is on how quickly men tends to come, like on average it's just in
1 to 5
minutes. Yeah, exactly. So this is very normal, you know. It's to slow everything down. Maybe you can give him a massage. Maybe you need to step away from him altogether. So there is several things that you can do. And finally, women who are listening, don't be afraid to take initiative. I know that it's really nice that having the man to take initiative in the bedroom, but it's not his job. You should also take initiative, and I know there can be fear of rejection, just like as the man would feel. So yeah, take the lead, take initiative, and create what you want emotionally and sexually.
Yeah, and this is just a bit of a recap. Is like, you know, to support men, how women can support men, and how anyone can support men. To be honest, how men can support men is like allowing them the space to open up and talk, not ridicule, not kind of attack or accuse. When a man starts to open up and talk about what he's feeling, don't laugh at him. You know, all these sorts of things that we see commonly happen is, you know, and also something we kind of maybe missed out is like not allowing someone to tell you information but not tell you the 100% of everything, because sometimes we have parts that we don't necessarily want to talk about, and it doesn't mean anything about you, it just means maybe we're not ready. You know, seeking out healthy role models, as well as like looking at the assumptions you have about men and the conversations that are constantly been having around you, around men, as well as the stuff in the bedroom, which is, you know, allow him to take the lead, allow him to lead if that's what you want to, without criticism, without judgment, without nitpicking, you know, be that in the bedroom or outside the bedroom, and also the considerations about sexual performance and taking the lead.
Yeah.
Wonderful. So, you know where to find me, at The Authentic Man on Instagram. Yeah, I hope you've enjoyed this episode. We have a how to create a conscious relationship workshop coming up in December on the 15th, if I'm correct. 12th? Okay, the 12th, apologies people. On the 12th, so we'll be talking a lot about this sorts of support stuff going both ways inside of that. But until then, I say ciao to my podcast listeners.
Bye.